The air in the diner was thick with the smell of coffee and fried onions, a comforting hum of quiet conversation and clinking plates. Evelyn Lawson was tracing the rim of her teacup, a small smile on her face as she watched the morning light cut through the window. Her book lay open, forgotten. She was savoring the peace. The bell above the door jangled, not with a gentle ring, but with a violent slam. The peace shattered. A young man in a blue and yellow varsity jacket, a bold white and on the chest, shouldered his way in, followed by two friends. They were loud, a storm cloud of boisterous energy and unchecked laughter. They dropped into the booth directly behind Evelyn, their voices like a stereo suddenly cranked to maximum volume. Evelyn flinched, but didn't turn. She focused on her tea, on the paragraph she'd been reading. Let it pass, she thought. They'll settle. But they didn't. Their conversation was a crude performance, vulgar, bragging, punctuated by thumps on the table. Evelyn tried to sink into her book. Then a particularly harsh racist slur cut through the diner air, aimed at no one and everyone. It landed on Evelyn's shoulders like a physical weight. The few other patrons fell silent. The waitress behind the counter froze. Evelyn took a slow, deep breath. She turned her head just slightly, not a full confrontation, just a look. A look that said, "We can all hear you. Have some decency." That's all it was. A look. The ringleader, a young man with close-cropped hair and a face flushed with arrogance, caught it. He leaned around the booth, his eyes locking onto hers. "You got a problem?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I just think everyone would appreciate a little quieter conversation," Evelyn said, her voice steady but soft. "That's all." He stared at her, a smirk twisting his lips. He looked her up and down. The simple beige cardigan, the gentle face framed by silver hair, the vulnerability of her age. He saw an easy target, a prop for his show. "Oh, you think, do you?" he said, his voice rising. "I'll tell you what I think. I think you need to worry about your own damn business, you old." The word he used was a weapon, ugly and ancient. It hung in the air, toxic. Evelyn's face drained of color, not from fear but from a profound, weary sorrow. "There's no call for that language, young man," she whispered. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He slid out of the booth and stood over her, looming. His friends watched, egging him on with silent grins. "I'll talk any way I want. You don't like it? What are you going to do about it?" Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard, and what happens next in this quiet diner is something you need to see through to the end. His name was Kyle Briggs. And in that moment, fueled by a lifetime of unchallenged entitlement and the performative bravado for his friends, he made a decision that would unravel his entire world. He raised his hand, not in a fist, but with a cold, deliberate contempt. "I'll teach you a lesson," he spat, and he slapped her. The sound was a crack that silenced the entire universe of the diner. It wasn't a punch meant to brawl, it was a gesture of utter disrespect, meant to demean, to humiliate, to assert dominance over what he saw as nothing. Evelyn's head snapped to the side. Her hand flew to her cheek, her eyes wide with a pain that was far more emotional than physical. Tears, hot and immediate, welled up but did not fall. She just stared at the floor, her breath catching, the world reduced to the sting on her skin and the crushing weight of the injustice. Kyle stood there, breathing heavily, a triumphant, ugly smirk on his face. He had done it. He had shown them. He turned back to his friends, expecting their cheers, their approval. The diner was utterly, deathly silent. His friends weren't smiling anymore. The waitress had her hand over her mouth. An old man at the counter had half risen from his stool, his face a mask of fury, and none of them, least of all Kyle Briggs, noticed the man who had just walked in through the still jangling door. a man in a severe, impeccably tailored black suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He had seen it all: the final approach, the raised hand, the slap, the tears. He stood frozen just inside the doorway, his own world collapsing into a single white-hot point of fury. The woman at the table, shrinking into her cardigan, was his mother, and the man in the suit was Judge Marcus Thorne of the United States Court of Appeals. The morning had begun in perfection for Evelyn Lawson. At 74, she had cultivated a deep appreciation for life's simple, quiet rituals. The early light through her kitchen window, the precise 2 minutes for her English breakfast tea, the 20-minute walk to the neighborhood diner, the sunny side up, where she knew the staff and they knew her. It was a grounding practice, a way to start the day connected to the world, to feel the rhythm of her community. Her husband Robert had loved this diner too. They'd been coming here for over 40 years, through job changes, through Marcus's schooling, through Robert's illness. The vinyl in their favorite booth had been replaced twice, but the feeling remained: this was a place of solace. Today, she was reading a novel her son had given her for her birthday, a historical epic about resilience. Marcus, always trying to expand her horizons, though she was plenty expanded already, thank you very much. She smiled, thinking of him, her brilliant, serious boy. He'd called her last night, his voice tight with the stress of a heavy caseload. "I might pop in for a quick coffee tomorrow morning, Mom, if my meeting finishes early. A dose of your sanity." She'd told him she'd be there as always. She'd worn the simple beige cardigan he'd given her last Christmas, soft as a whisper. She was nestled in her usual booth, the one with a view of the street, and the faded photograph of the original 1950s diner on the wall beside it. The place was a classic: red vinyl seats, chrome trim, the comforting grind of the grill, the gentle, friendly clatter of plates. It was her sanctuary. She'd just taken a sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her, when the bell above the door jangled with a violence that made her teaspoon rattle in her saucer. Kyle Briggs's sanctuary was different. It was the admiration of his fraternity brothers, the perceived invincibility of his 21 years, the status his varsity jacket conferred. He was the son of a successful, distant father, a commercial real estate developer, and a doting, excuse-making mother. He was average in his classes, exceptional in his sense of privilege, a big fish in the carefully curated small pond of his social circle. Last night had been a series of victories, a party where he'd been the loudest, the center of attention, too much to drink, the feeling of being untouchable. The diner stop was a postscript, a place to prolong the night's energy and grab greasy food before facing the hangover. He'd done it a dozen times before, trailing boisterous energy into sleepy spaces, always leaving a faint tremor of annoyance in his wake, which he mistook for respect. When Evelyn had turned, when she had spoken with that gentle, chiding tone, it was like a pinprick to the bloated balloon of his ego. In his world, women like her were background characters. Mothers, grandmothers, service workers, unseen and unheard. They certainly didn't correct him. The outrage he felt was immediate and disproportionate. Who was she? The audacity. It was a challenge to the entire hierarchy of his universe. His friends, Josh and Ben, were watching, waiting for his response. This was his audience. The slap was an impulse, a reaction born of a lifetime where his impulses had rarely been checked. It felt powerful in the moment. It felt like control. It was meant to reset the world to its proper order with him on top. For Evelyn, the pain was a secondary wave. The first was a profound, disorienting shock that traveled faster than nerve endings. It had been decades since anyone had laid a hand on her in anger. The last time might have been a shove in a segregated line as a child, or the time a man had spat at her feet during a protest with Robert. The feeling was horrifyingly familiar, the dehumanization, the reduction to an object that could be acted upon without consequence. The heat on her cheek was nothing compared to the ice flooding her veins, a cold that reached back through time. She looked down because looking at him, seeing the triumph in his eyes, would have broken something inside her she needed to keep intact. She focused on the pattern of the Formica table, the little flecks of silver in the white, grounding herself in a detail, refusing to let him take her entire reality. In that silence, different calculations were being made. The waitress, Maria, a single mother who had served Evelyn for years, was already inching toward the phone under the counter, her eyes on Evelyn, heart pounding with a protective fury. The old man at the counter, a retired mechanic named Len who came in every day for black coffee and the sports page, was calculating the distance between himself and the kid, the arthritis in his knees be damned. He was rolling his heavy ceramic mug in his hands, his knuckles white. Kyle's friends, Josh and Ben, were exchanging a glance that for the first time held no trace of amusement. The grins had vanished. This had gone past funny, past edgy. This was real, and it was bad, and the shadow of consequence was suddenly visible on the wall. They shrunk back into the booth, wanting to disappear, and then all eyes, except Evelyn's which were still cast down, drifted to the man in the doorway. He had entered so quietly after the slam, a study in contrasts. His presence now filled the silent room. Marcus Thorne had always possessed a preternatural calm. It was a necessary trait for a judge, honed over years in courtrooms where the stakes were lives and liberties. The bench required a temperament that could absorb shocking testimony, legal theatrics, and profound human folly without so much as a flinch. He processed the world through layers of analysis and precedent. But in that moment, every layer was stripped away by a white-hot wire of primal instinct. The scene imprinted itself on his mind with photographic, horrific clarity. The curve of his mother's back as she tried to make herself small, a posture of defeat he had never seen her take. The glint of the young man's class ring on the hand that had just struck her. The brutal, simple geometry of power in the room, the standing, flushed aggressor, the seated, shrinking victim. All thought, all legal training, all concept of consequence evaporated. What remained was a singular, burning directive: get between her and the threat. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He moved with a terrifying, deliberate speed, crossing the checkered floor in 6 long, silent strides. He placed his leather briefcase, worn smooth from years of use, on the empty seat opposite his mother, a simple, mundane action that somehow made his presence even more monumental. It was an anchor. It said, "This is our space. This intrusion is over." Kyle, finally sensing the shift in the room's energy, a shift as palpable as a drop in barometric pressure before a storm, turned from his booth. He saw a well-dressed black man in his late 40s standing by the old woman. A relative, a concerned citizen, another problem to swat away, another character who didn't know his place. "What's your issue, man?" Kyle blustered, puffing out his chest, the varsity jacket seeming to inflate around him. "This is a private conversation." Marcus did not look at him, not yet. He knelt down beside his mother's booth, his back to Kyle, a wall of wool and will. His voice, when he spoke to her, was so soft it was almost inaudible to anyone else, a private universe of two. "Mom, look at me." Evelyn slowly raised her head. When her eyes met her son's, the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. Seeing his face, the face of her child, her protector, her greatest pride, shattered the last of her composure. A small wounded sound escaped her lips, the sound of a hurt that was finally safe to express. Marcus's heart fractured cleanly in his chest. He took her hand, careful not to touch her reddening cheek. "Are you hurt beyond this?" He meant her body, but his eyes asked about her soul. She shook her head, unable to speak, squeezing his hand with a desperate strength that told him everything. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'm here, you are safe." He said it like a decree, a fact he would will into existence with every ounce of his being. Behind him, Kyle grew impatient, emboldened by the man's apparent ignoring of him. The silence was accusing him, and he had to fill it. "Hey, I'm talking to you." She started it, sticking her nose where it didn't belong. She got what she deserved. At the word deserved, Marcus Thorne stood up. He turned, and now Kyle saw his face fully. It was not the face of an angry bystander. It was a mask of controlled, infinite fury. The eyes were not flashing. They were dark, deep, and utterly still, like the surface of a well that goes down for miles. The calm was more frightening than any shout. This was not a man who was going to throw a punch. This was a man who could dismantle a life with a word. "What is your name?" Marcus asked. His voice was clear, low, and carried the weight of a gavel falling on polished wood. Kyle scoffed, a forced, nervous exhalation. "What's it to you? Your name?" The tone did not change in volume, but the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Even the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed to quiet. Something in that voice, in the absolute lack of fear or bluster finally, pierced Kyle's bravado. A sliver of real, cold unease crept into his gut. This wasn't following the script. Kyle Briggs? Marcus gave a single, slow nod, as if filing the information away in a mental ledger. "You have just assaulted Evelyn Lawson, in front of multiple witnesses. You will now sit down in that booth, and you will not move. You will not speak. You will wait." Kyle laughed, a nervous, brittle sound that cracked in the middle. "Or what, you gonna call the cops? Go ahead. My dad's lawyer will have me out before lunch." He said it with the rehearsed confidence of someone who had heard it work before, a charm that had always unlocked doors and smoothed over troubles. For the first time, a hint of something other than fury touched Marcus's expression. It was a flicker of cold, almost pitying recognition, the recognition of a type, the entitled young man for whom consequences were always abstract, always negotiable, always for other people. He reached into his inner suit pocket, not for a phone, but for a small, leather-bound wallet, worn at the corners. He flipped it open, holding it up so Kyle and his now pale friends could see the gold shield and the formal identification card behind a clear window. "I am not calling the police, Mr. Briggs," Judge Marcus Thorne said, every syllable measured and precise, each word a brick in a wall. "I am a United States Circuit Judge. You are now a subject of federal interest. Sit down." The words fell into the silent diner with the force of a physical blow. United States, federal, judge. They were words from a different world than the one Kyle inhabited, a world of serious men in serious rooms where varsity jackets meant nothing and a father's lawyer was just another man standing at a lectern. The color drained completely from Kyle's face. He sat down, heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. The revelation seemed to short-circuit Kyle's understanding of reality. His mouth opened, then closed, a fish. On a line. He blinked, looking from the federal credential to the implacable face of the man holding it, then to the elderly woman, a judge's mother, and finally to his own friends, who looked like they wanted to dissolve into the vinyl seats. Josh had his face in his hands. Ben was staring straight ahead, rigid. The script he knew, bluster, threat, daddy's lawyer, had no lines for this. There was no scene where the federal judge showed up before the cops. This was a narrative rupture. Marcus turned his attention to the room. His gaze, now that of a presiding officer, swept over Maria the waitress, Len the mechanic, and the two other wide-eyed patrons. A young couple on a date who now looked terrified. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. "This establishment is now the scene of a federal assault investigation. I must ask you all to remain for a short while to provide witness statements. Your cooperation is appreciated and will be noted. It was not a request. It was a judicial order, delivered with a steely courtesy that made it all the more immutable." He then looked at Maria, his expression softening a degree. "Ma'am, would you please bring a glass of water and a clean, cool cloth for my mother?" The shift in his tone when speaking to her was subtle but profound, from federal judge to caring son, acknowledging her humanity in the midst of the procedural. Maria jumped into action, nodding mutely, her hands trembling slightly as she filled a glass from the soda fountain and grabbed a clean linen towel from the rack, running it under the cold tap. Marcus finally took his phone from his pocket. He did not dial 911. He scrolled through his contacts and dialed a direct number to the chief of the local U.S. Marshals Service, Frank Delaney, a man he knew professionally and respected. "Frank, it's Marcus Thorne." A pause. "I have a situation requiring immediate federal attention at the Sunnyside Up Diner on Maple. Assault on a senior citizen, racially motivated, witnessed. The perpetrator is detained and identified. I need a team, quietly, and local PD liaison for crowd control outside." "Yes, my mother is the victim." He listened for a moment, his eyes never leaving Kyle, who had begun to tremble slightly, a fine vibration in his hands where they lay on the table. "Thank you, Frank." He ended the call and finally took the seat opposite his mother, reaching across the table to hold both of her hands. The universe narrowed to the two of them, the diner, the stunned patrons, the trembling young man. All of it receded into a blur. "Tell me everything, Mom, from the beginning. Take your time." While Evelyn, in a halting but clear voice, began to recount the events, the slam of the door, the crude jokes, the slur that had hung in the air like poison gas, her simple request for quiet, the diner existed in a state of suspended animation. Len kept a steady, grim stare on Kyle's booth, a silent sentinel. Maria brought the cloth and water, placing them gently before Evelyn, touching her shoulder briefly in a gesture of solidarity. Kyle's friends whispered frantically to each other, their voices low hisses. "We didn't do anything, we didn't touch her." Their earlier laughter, their egging him on with their presence, now felt like a brand of complicity they couldn't scrub off. Kyle's mind was a frantic spinning wheel. Federal judge, federal. This wasn't town cops who might know his father, who might be persuaded with a phone call, a favor, a donation. This was the kind of thing that went on a permanent record, that didn't care about your family name, the kind that could get you expelled from university, that could bar you from professions, that could follow you like a ghost forever. The weight of his action, which moments ago had felt so light and justified, a mere flick of his wrist to put an irritant in its place, now crushed down on him with the density of a collapsing star. He watched the judge gently pat his mother's hands, saw the profound tenderness in the gesture, and felt a nausea that had nothing to do with last night's alcohol. He had not just hit an old lady, he had violated a sanctuary. He had introduced violence into a world where it did not belong, and that world was now responding with the full, terrifying machinery of order. The response was swift and intimidating in its efficiency, a lesson in the difference between local disorder and federal attention. First, 2 uniformed local police officers arrived, alerted by the Marshals Service. They were brief and professional, a study in contrast to the chaotic energy Kyle had brought. They spoke quietly to Judge Thorne, then secured the perimeter of the diner, standing at the door and taking initial names from the patrons. They looked at Kyle with a detached, procedural coldness that was worse than anger. He was not a person to them, he was a problem to be contained and handed off. Then the federal agents arrived. 2 U.S. Marshals in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the gold letters U.S. Marshal. They moved with an economical purposefulness. They spoke first to Judge Thorne, a quiet, respectful conversation near the door, heads inclined together. Then one, a tall man with a close-cropped beard, approached Kyle's booth. "Kyle Briggs, stand up, please. Place your hands on the table." The procedure was calm, devoid of malice or anger, and utterly terrifying in its impersonal rigor. Kyle stood, his legs weak. He placed his hands on the Formica tabletop, the surface cool against his palms. The marshal stood behind him. "You are under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights, words Kyle had only heard on television, washed over him, each one a lock clicking shut. The words assault on a protected person and potential hate crime enhancement were used, clinical terms that transformed his stupid, impulsive act into a category of federal offense. They were not rough with him as they guided his hands behind his back, but their touch was impersonal and firm as they handcuffed him. The cold metal closing around his wrists was the most real, most definitive sensation he had ever felt. The sound of the twin clicks seemed to echo in the absolute silence of the room, a period at the end of a sentence. As he was let out, past the other booths, he chanced to look toward Evelyn and Marcus. Evelyn was watching him, her expression no longer one of fear or even anger, but of a deep, weary, almost maternal sadness, a sadness for the waste of it all. Marcus was not looking at him at all. He was speaking softly to the other marshal, pointing to the small, domed security camera mounted over the cash register. Kyle was a matter to be processed, a docket number waiting to be assigned, a set of facts to be entered into a system. He was no longer the protagonist of his own story. Outside, the morning sun was blindingly normal. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the 2 police cruisers and the unmarked federal sedan. They saw a young man in a bright varsity jacket, head bowed, being placed into the back of a government vehicle, not a local squad car. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Phones were raised, recording. The digital rumor mill began to turn. Inside, Marcus helped his mother to her feet. "Let's get you home, Mom." "My book," she said softly, her voice still shaky, clinging to the normalcy of the object. "I have it." He tucked the novel under his arm, picked up his briefcase, and guided her toward the door, his body subtly positioned between her and the gathering outside. One of the marshals stepped ahead, clearing a path through the onlookers with a quiet, "Please step back." In the car, the silence was thick, pressurized. Evelyn stared out the window, the vibrant, familiar neighborhood passing by in a blur of color and life that felt suddenly distant. Finally she spoke, her voice small in the quiet space. "I'm sorry, Marcus." He glanced at her, pained. "Sorry? Mom, you have nothing to be sorry for. I caused a scene. I disrupted your day. Now you're involved in this mess. It's going to be in the papers, on the news. Your job." He pulled the car over to the side of a quiet, tree-lined street. He turned to her, his judicial demeanor gone, replaced entirely by the face of her heartbroken son. "You did not cause this. That young man caused this. You were reading a book in a diner. That is all anyone should ever be able to do, anywhere, at any time. The fact that he thought he could violate your peace, your person, that is the mess. Not you, never you." He reached over and cupped her unharmed cheek. "He hit the most decent person I know. That's on him. And the world is about to explain that to him in very clear terms." He saw it then, the shame she was feeling, the internalized weight of a lifetime of being told to be quiet, to not make trouble, to swallow indignities for the sake of peace. It was a shame that had no rightful place on her, and seeing it ignited a fresh wave of fury in him, but he kept it from his voice, channeling it into a fierce, protective certainty.
"We are going home. You are going to rest."
And then, we are going to see this through. Not with anger, Mom. We're going to see it through with the law. The same law that protects everyone, especially you. The news spread through the city's veins with the speed of a digital pulse, leaping from text messages to social media posts to local news desks. By noon, the story was headline on local news sites: Varsity Jacket Youth Assaults Elderly Woman at Diner, Faces Federal Hate Crime Charges. The details were scant but potent: racist slur, vicious slap, federal judge's mother. By evening, it was trending regionally, a perfect storm of outrage optics. The narrative wrote itself, a modern-day parable of unthinking privilege meeting the iron wall of consequence, with a dramatic twist of poetic justice. In his sterile, cold holding cell at the federal building, Kyle Briggs experienced a new kind of solitude. The bravado of his friends was absent, the trappings of his identity, the jacket, the phone, the confident smirk, the imagined shield of his father's influence, were gone, stripped away. He sat on a hard metal bench bolted to the wall, wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit. He was given his one phone call. With numb fingers, he dialed his father's office. The conversation was not what he expected. There was no immediate reassurance, no booming promise to get this straightened out. There was a long, static-filled silence after Kyle's choked-out, rambling explanation, a silence so profound Kyle thought the call had dropped. A federal judge? His father, Richard Briggs, finally said, his voice not loud but flat with a horror Kyle had never heard before. It was the sound of a man seeing a financial spreadsheet with an irreparable loss column. You struck the mother of a federal judge in public, and you used that language? The disappointment was a physical force through the receiver, a wave of icy water. Kyle, what in God's name were you thinking? I don't know, Dad, She was disrespecting me and I lost my temper and stopped talking, his father interrupted, voice tight, controlled. Do not say another word to anyone, not to guards, not to cellmates, no one. I am calling Benjamin Price right now, but understand this, son. This is not a speeding ticket. This is not underage drinking at a frat house. This is potentially career-ending before your career even begins. For you. And given the publicity, potentially very damaging for me. The call ended not with a goodbye, but with a dull click that sounded to Kyle like a tombstone ceiling. Kyle lowered the receiver, the plastic heavy in his hand. Career-ending, damaging for me. The future he vaguely imagined. Maybe taking over a division of his dad's business, a nice car, a house in the right neighborhood. A certain level of automatic respect suddenly seemed like a mirage dissolving in a desert. It had never been guaranteed, he realized with a lurch. It had been contingent on him not doing something catastrophically, monumentally stupid. He had crossed a line he didn't even know was there, and the landscape on the other side was barren. He thought of the judge's eyes in the diner. There had been no personal hatred in them. That was the most frightening part. It had been the impersonal gaze of the law itself, pure and uncaring about his fraternity, his father's contacts, his excuses. The law was a machine, and he had just fed himself into its gears. At the Thorne household, a different kind of gravity had settled. The cozy, book-filled home felt both like a refuge and a command center. Evelyn was resting in her sitting room, a soft Afghan over her legs, a dear friend from her church, Clara, having come over to sit with her. They spoke in low tones, not about the incident directly, but about faith, about endurance, about the hymns they loved. The familiar ritual of companionship was a balm. Marcus was in his home study, the door closed. The shelves were lined with legal volumes and family photos. He was not working on his appellate court caseload. He was sitting in his leather chair, staring at a particular family photograph on his desk. It showed a younger Evelyn, her smile bright, her husband Robert, gone these 10 years from a sudden heart attack, with his arm around her, and a teenage Marcus in his graduation gown, standing between them, trying to look serious and grown up. His father, a proud, quiet postal worker who had carried the weight of dignity like a sacrament, had drilled one lesson into him above all: dignity is not given, son. It is claimed, and you must always be ready to claim it fiercely for those who are being denied their own. Marcus had built his career, his very identity on that principle, though he practiced it through the cool, reasoned medium of the law, briefs, arguments, precedent. But today, the law felt abstract. The man who wanted to go back to that diner and repay the violence in kind, to show Kyle Briggs what real physical consequence felt like, was still simmering just beneath the black robe. He acknowledged that man, that raw, protective son, then gently but firmly set him aside. He was not a vigilante. He was a judge, and his mother needed the judge now, the one who knew how to navigate the system, to ensure justice was not just done but seen to be done, more than she needed the angry son. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was Chief Marshal Frank Delaney. "Marcus, we have the security footage from the diner. It's clear, high definition. Audio is muffled, but we got the slur. We got her request. And we got his teach you a lesson line clear as a bell. The visual? It's damning. The local DA is already talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office about jurisdiction. Given the federal official connection and the clear potential civil rights violation, it's likely to stay with us. The kid has a lawyer. A good one. Price and Dunn. They're already making noises about youthful indiscretion, provocation, and questioning the hate crime enhancement." "Provocation," Marcus repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Reading a novel is provocation." "I know," Frank sighed, a weary sound. "They're doing their job, but the video does their client no favors. It's not a shove in a crowded bar. It's a deliberate, contemptuous slap to the face of a senior citizen sitting down. Juries hate that. How's your mother?" "Shaken, deeply hurt. More by the words than the slap, I think. The slap was in action. The words, they're an ideology. They cut deeper. We'll need her formal videotaped statement soon. But we can do it here at your place on her schedule. We can make it as comfortable as possible." "Thank you, Frank." Marcus paused, choosing his words with care. "Process this by the book." "Exactly by the book. I want no hint of impropriety, no suggestion this is personal vendetta. The facts are bad enough. Let them stand on their own." "Understood, Judge, it will be by the book, but you know it's personal for everyone who sees that tape." Hanging up, Marcus knew the personal part was unavoidable. It was deeply, irrevocably personal. But the process had to be pristine, a diamond of procedure, for his mother's dignity, for the integrity of the system he served, and strangely, for the possibility that even Kyle Briggs deserved a process untainted by emotion. The law was the lesson, not Marcus Thorne's anger. The arraignment was held 2 days later in a federal courthouse, a building of imposing granite and marble that spoke of permanence and solemn power. Evelyn did not want to go, but Marcus gently insisted. "You are not a spectator, Mom. You are the victim of record. Your presence in that room is a silent, powerful statement. It asserts your worth, your personhood in this process. It reminds everyone, especially him, that this is about a real human being." She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, pearls at her neck, Robert's gift for their 30th anniversary. Marcus, in a dark suit but no robe, walked beside her, not as a judge today, but as her son, her escort. The courtroom was not open to the public for this initial hearing, but it was still intimidatingly formal. The Great Seal of the United States loomed behind the magistrate judge's bench, an eagle holding arrows and an olive branch. Kyle Briggs was led in by a marshal, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit his parents had presumably brought, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked young, pale, and utterly diminished, a sapling in a storm. His eyes, darting around the room like a trapped animal's, landed briefly on Evelyn before skittering away in a spasm of shame so intense it was almost palpable. His parents sat in the front row behind him, their faces drawn and anxious. His mother, a well-dressed woman with perfectly styled hair, was crying silently into a tissue. His father stared straight ahead at the back of his son's head, his jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. The charges were read by a clerk in a monotone that made them sound even more grave. Simple assault was a given. But the second charge, alleging the assault was motivated by racial animus, invoking the federal hate crime statute, was what made Kyle's lawyer, a sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed woman named Amanda Dunn, stiffen almost imperceptibly. She entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf, arguing to the magistrate that the language was not racially motivated hate speech, but merely crude, offensive locker room talk magnified by alcohol, and that the physical contact was an unfortunate, reflexive overreaction to a perceived physical confrontation, a creative stretching of the truth. The magistrate, an older, no-nonsense man with a reputation for tolerating no foolishness, listened impassively. He reviewed the prosecution's evidence summary, including a description of the diner security footage. He denied bail, citing the violent nature of the offense against a particularly vulnerable member of the community and the serious flight risk given the severe mandatory minimum penalties associated with the enhanced charges. The gavel fell with a definitive crack. Kyle was led away again, the chains on his cuffs faintly jangling. As he passed the bar, his father reached out and touched his arm, a brief, awkward gesture that seemed to startle them both. Richard Briggs's eyes were filled with a complex storm of anger, fear, and a desperate, helpless love. Outside the courtroom, a small hive of reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. Marcus kept his arm firmly around his mother's shoulders, using his own body as a shield against the onslaught. "No comment at this time," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the clamor as he guided her toward a side exit where a car waited. A reporter, a young man with a thrust-out microphone, shouted a question that made Marcus stop dead in his tracks. "Judge Thorne, do you think the hate crime charge is appropriate, or is this just making it personal?" Marcus turned slowly and looked at the reporter. He did not raise his voice, but his words carried with the clarity of a bell in the hallway. "The assault on an elderly woman predicated on the color of her skin is not personal. It is a crime against the very idea of a civil society. The law exists to answer that crime. To call it personal is to minimize the public harm of bigotry. I have every confidence the law will respond proportionately." He then turned, helped his mother into the waiting car, and shut the door, leaving a momentarily silent crowd behind. He had not defended himself, he had defended the principle. It was a masterful judicial response. The turning point did not happen in a courtroom with lawyers and procedures. It happened in a small, stark, fluorescent-lit visitation room at the Federal Detention Center a week later. The air smelled of antiseptic and despair. Evelyn Lawson had been wrestling with a feeling she couldn't name for days. It wasn't forgiveness, it was too soon, and the hurt was too fresh, a bruise on her spirit. It was a profound, aching sense of waste, the waste of a young life hurtling toward ruin over a moment of stupid cruelty, the waste of her peaceful mourning, the waste of energy on hatred, energy that could have built something. She had preyed on it, talked late into the night with her pastor about the burdens of carrying another's sin, and finally, after a long silence over breakfast, she asked Marcus to arrange a meeting. Marcus was vehemently, uncharacteristically opposed. "Mom, absolutely not. You don't owe him anything. You don't need to face him again. The system will face him for you." "It's not for him, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but firm, the voice that had soothed his childhood fears and corrected his teenage arrogance. "It's for me. I need to say my piece. Not in a courtroom where lawyers twist words into knots. To him. Just to him. I need him to see me not as a victim in a legal document, but as the person he violated." Reluctantly, after hours of discussion and with strict security protocols in place, Marcus arranged it. He would be in an adjoining room, watching through a one-way mirror, a marshal stationed by the door inside with Evelyn. Another outside. Kyle was brought in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, forcing him to take small, shuffling steps. He looked even younger in the brutal fluorescent light, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness and fear. When he saw Evelyn sitting alone at the Formica table, so still and composed, he flinched as if struck again. He shuffled to the chair opposite her and sat down, his eyes fixed on the metal loop in the table, where his cuffs would be secured if needed. He couldn't meet her gaze. "Mrs. Lawson," he mumbled to the scratched tabletop. "Kyle," she said. Her voice was steady, not cold, but clear as water. She waited until he slowly, agonizingly raised his eyes. "Look at me." He did. He saw the faint, yellowing remnant of a bruise on her cheekbone. He saw the lines of her face, maps of a long life. He saw not anger, not vengeance, but a deep, assessing sadness that seemed to hold him accountable in a way no judge's sentence ever could. "I want you to understand something," she began, folding her hands in her lap. "When you slapped me, you took more than my dignity for a moment. You brought back a history of slaps you know nothing about. Slaps my mother felt from white women in department stores who didn't want her trying on hats. Looks my husband endured from foremen who called him boy when he was 30. Barriers my son had to break through twice just to be considered half as good as the next man. You reached back through decades and dragged all of that ugliness into a sunny morning in a diner over a plate of eggs." Kyle's throat worked. He wanted to look away, but her gaze held him. I didn't think." "That is the truest thing you've said so far," Evelyn replied, not unkindly, but with devastating accuracy. "You didn't think I was a person. You saw a caricature, an obstacle, something less. That is the poison, Kyle, not the slap, the belief behind it. The slap is just the flower that grows from that poisonous seed." Tears began to track down Kyle's face, slow and helpless. They were not performative. They were the first honest tears of shame and understanding he had likely ever cried, breaching a dam of his own ignorance. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words sounding utterly, hopelessly inadequate in the face of what she had described. "I believe you are sorry now," Evelyn said, her head tilting slightly. "Sorry you got caught. Sorry the consequences are so high. Sorry. Your picture is on the news. But are you sorry for the belief? That's what I need to know. Because if we just punish the slap and leave the belief untouched, we've done nothing but warehouse a body for a few years. The poison will still be there." She stood up, her movement graceful and causing him to start. The marshal by the door shifted his weight. "I didn't come for an apology. I came to tell you what you took, and to ask you a question. Who are you, Kyle Briggs, beneath that jacket? Are you only the young man who does cruel things for an audience? Or is there someone else in there, someone who might be appalled by what he did? You have a very long time now to decide." She turned and left the room without looking back, leaving Kyle alone at the table, his head collapsing into his shackled hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, wrenching sobs. In the observation room, Marcus watched, his own eyes wet. His mother had just taught a more powerful, more devastating lesson about responsibility and humanity than any sentence he could ever hand down from the bench. She had made it human again, and in doing so she had begun the real work of justice. The meeting with Evelyn changed the trajectory of the case, though not in the direct legal sense. The wheels of justice continued to turn with their own immutable momentum. The U.S. Attorney's Office was preparing a strong case, the video their centerpiece. Amanda Dunn, Kyle's attorney, was a savvy and pragmatic defender. She saw the emotional and factual weight of the hate crime charge and knew a jury would see the video and feel a visceral, unanimous outrage. Her strategy began to shift subtly from outright denial to aggressive damage control, mitigation. She approached the assistant U.S. attorney with a proposal Kyle would plead guilty to the simple assault charge, a felony. In exchange, the hate crime enhancement would be dropped, sparing him the significantly longer mandatory minimum sentence, which could be over a decade. It was a cold calculus. Take a shorter prison term rather than risk a catastrophic loss at trial. He's a young kid, first offense, remorseful, she argued. A trial will be a circus. This is a clean resolution. But the prosecution was not inclined to deal. The evidence was strong, the victim was sympathetic, and the mother of a federal judge, and the symbolic importance of prosecuting a clear-cut hate crime in a divisive time was not lost on them. They wanted the enhancement. They wanted the statement. Then Kyle did something unexpected. During a meeting with Amanda Dunn and his ashen-faced parents in a secure conference room, he instructed his lawyer to reject the plea deal she was negotiating. He told her he wanted to plead guilty to everything, to the assault and to the hate crime charge. "Have you lost your mind?" his father barked, the controlled facade finally cracking. He slammed a hand on the table. "That could mean 10 to 15 years, Kyle. Years. Your life will be over before it starts." Kyle, who had been quiet and withdrawn since the visitation, a new stillness about him, looked at his father. The old defiance was gone, burned away. In its place was a grim, painful clarity. "She asked me who I was beneath the jacket, Dad. I'm trying to figure that out. Starting by telling the truth, the whole truth, seems like the only place to begin. I did it. I said it. I meant it in the moment to hurt her because of what she was. I own that, all of it. Hiding from part of it, that's just more of the same old Kyle." Richard Briggs stared at his son, seeing a stranger. For the first time, he did not see a boy to be bailed out, a problem to be managed with money and connections. He saw a young man staring into an abyss of his own making, and instead of looking for a rope to climb out, he was trying to map the contours of the darkness so he would never fall in again. He didn't recognize this person, and that perhaps was the first fragile flicker of something like hope amidst the wreckage. He sank back into his chair, defeated not by the law but by his son's newfound uncomfortable integrity. Amanda Dunn studied her client with a renewed professional interest. This changed the narrative she could present at sentencing. Remorse was one thing. Unvarnished, self-destructive acceptance of the worst possible characterization of one's actions was another, potentially powerful thing. The sentencing hearing was packed. Media, community members, law students, curious citizens. The atmosphere was thick with a grim anticipation. Kyle Briggs, in a sober, well-fitted gray suit his parents had bought for this day, stood before Judge Eleanor Vance, a renowned jurist known for her intellect, compassion, and tough sentences in hate crime cases. The prosecution laid out the facts, cold and clear. They played the security footage on a large screen. The silent film was more powerful than any narration. The smirk, the casual raise of the hand, the slap, Evelyn's flinch, the defensive curl of her body. The gallery stirred with a collective intake of breath, a murmur of anger. They spoke of Evelyn Lawson's lifelong contributions to her community, teacher's aide, church deacon, volunteer, her dignity, the profound trauma of the event, the fear it instilled in other seniors of color. They argued for a sentence at the higher end of the guidelines, to send a message that such acts would be met with the full force of federal law. Amanda Dunn then rose. She did not try to deny. Instead, she worked to explain. She presented a mitigation packet. Kyle's academic records unremarkable. Letters from former teachers and a high school coach, some hesitant, others surprisingly supportive of the good kid they once knew, and evidence of his community service in high school building houses with Habitat for Humanity, since abandoned. She spoke not of a monster, but of a young man tragically adrift in a culture of privilege, performative masculinity, and insulated ignorance. She spoke of the poison he absorbed from his environment without critical thought, a product as much as a perpetrator. She presented the results of a psychological evaluation that described him as immature, with underdeveloped empathy, but not inherently violent or psychopathic. She did not ask for exoneration. She asked for mercy, for a sentence that included the possibility of transformative justice, not just punitive detention. She highlighted his guilty plea to all charges, his instruction to her to not bargain away the hate crime component as evidence of his first painful steps toward accountability. Then, Kyle was given the chance to speak. He turned not to the judge, but first to where Evelyn sat, with Marcus a solid, protective presence beside her. He gripped the sides of the wooden podium, his knuckles white. "Mrs. Lawson," his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, a dry, painful sound. "There is nothing I can say that will undo what I did. I'm sorry is a weak phrase for the damage I caused. You were right. I was sorry I got caught. I was scared. I was selfish. But you made me see. You made me see you. And in seeing you, I had to see myself. And what I saw was ugly and small." He took a shuddering breath, forcing himself to keep his eyes on hers. "I am guilty of the crime. I am guilty of the hate. I accept the court's judgment. I hope that one day, through hard work and genuine change, I can become someone who would never, ever do what I did. Not because of the law, but because it is wrong, because people are not objects. Thank you for making me look. I'm so sorry." He sat down, spent. Judge Vance was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled. The courtroom waited. Finally she spoke. "The law has two primary purposes, just punishment and the rehabilitation of the offender. What we have here is a brutal, demeaning act of racial violence against a beloved and vulnerable member of our community. It was unprovoked, contemptuous, and rooted in a vile ideology of superiority. Such an act deserves significant punishment. It is an attack on the fabric of our society itself." She paused, letting the weight of that settle. "We also have in the victim a person of extraordinary grace who, in an act of immense courage, has sparked what appears to be the beginnings of genuine, uncalculated remorse. We have a defendant who, for the first time, is taking full, unvarnished responsibility for both his actions and the hateful motivation behind them." She sentenced Kyle to 30 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. It was a substantial sentence, but far less than the decade-plus he could have faced if convicted at trial. The supervised release came with strict, non-negotiable conditions: completion of a intensive residential restorative justice and racial sensitivity program, ongoing psychological counseling, and 500 hours of community service specifically working with elderly populations in diverse communities. This sentence, Judge Vance concluded, looking directly at Kyle, is designed not just to incarcerate, but to force a relentless, uncomfortable confrontation with the consequences of hatred, both for your victim and for yourself. it also provides a structured, difficult path toward demonstrating redemption. The court will be watching your progress very closely. I suggest you make the most of this opportunity because it is more than many in your victim's position would ever offer. The gavel fell. A chapter closed and a much harder one began. The news cycle, insatiable and ever-turning, moved on to the next spectacle, as it always does. But for the people intimately involved, the real work was just beginning. Kyle was processed and sent to a medium-security federal correctional institution with a noted educational and vocational program. The first weeks were a blur of fear, anonymity, and brutal adjustment. Then, he enrolled in classes, GED tutoring for other inmates, American history, sociology. He read voraciously, books his lawyer sent at his request, The Fire Next Time, Between the World and Me, The New Jim Crow. He started writing, long, rambling, self-pitying journals at first. Then slowly they became reflections, painful and halting. He wrote to his parents, mending those fractures with honest, awkward words. He wrote letters of apology to the staff of the diner, which Maria, after some discussion, framed behind the counter next to the old photo of the 1950s diner, a complicated artifact of penance. And with the permission of the court and his counselor, he began writing periodic letters to Evelyn, care of her attorney. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He described what he was learning, about reconstruction, about redlining, about the sheer effort of the daily dignity his victim's generation had had to muster. He quoted lines from books that shocked him. He was awkward, painfully earnest, and painfully young. The bravado was gone, replaced by a trembling vulnerability. Evelyn did not write back at first. She read the letters, sometimes with Marcus, sometimes alone. They were a reminder of a pain she was trying to put behind her. Then, after the sixth letter, which contained a passage about him tutoring an older black inmate in math and the unexpected friendship that was forming, she sent a single postcard. It was a vintage picture of the Sunny Side Up diner from the 1970s. On the back, in her elegant cursive, she wrote, "Understanding is a lifelong meal. It's often bitter before it's nourishing. Don't stop eating." It was neither an embrace nor a rejection. It was a simple, profound acknowledgement of his effort. It was humanity, at a distance. Marcus watched this cautious, court-monitored correspondence with guarded, professional caution, but he respected his mother's agency completely. His own transformation was more internal. The case had forced him to reconcile the dispassionate, analytical judge with the protective, furious son. He began to accept speaking engagements, not about his mother's case specifically, but about the rule of law as a shield for the vulnerable, the importance of procedural integrity even, especially when emotions run high, and the quiet, everyday heroism of citizens like his mother who meet hatred with a demand for accountability rather than reciprocal rage. 2 years passed. Kyle Briggs, having earned a small reduction in time for good behavior and exemplary completion of every educational program available, was released to a halfway house to begin his 3-year term of supervised release. He was thinner, his eyes older, holding a knowledge that hadn't been there before. His parents were there to meet him. The dynamic between them changed, quieter, more real, stripped of pretense. Conversations were about practicalities, about the present, not the grand, assumed future. His community service placement, assigned by his probation officer, was at the Golden Years multi-purpose community center in a racially and economically diverse part of the city. His job was manual and humble, setting up and breaking down tables and chairs for events, helping in the kitchen with meal prep and cleanup, assisting seniors with mobility issues to and from vehicles. It was tedious, often physically demanding, and utterly humbling work. For the first month, he kept his head down, a silent ghost in a room full of vibrant life. He was that kid, and the whispers, though not malicious, followed him. The seniors, with a lifetime of radar for insincerity, watched him closely. Then one rainy Thursday, he was helping clear lunch tables when an older black gentleman named Mr. Jenkins, who used a walker, struggled with his heavy tray. Kyle automatically moved to help, reaching for it. "I've got it, son," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice firm but not unkind, stopping Kyle's hand with a look. "I know you do, sir," Kyle said, stepping back, but staying close, his hands held slightly out. "Just spotting you." Like a gym spotter, Mr. Jenkins, a retired mechanic who had worked on the very first Corvettes, looked at him, really looked at him, his eyes shrewd and assessing. "You're that boy, aren't you? The one from the diner with Judge Thorne's mama?" Kyle's stomach dropped, but he held the man's gaze. "No more running. Yes, sir, I am." Mr. Jenkins nodded slowly, a world of understanding in the gesture. He carefully maneuvered his tray onto the cart Kyle had been pushing. Well, spotting me is good, thank you." He then turned his walker and moved slowly towards the lounge, leaving Kyle standing by the cart, his heart pounding. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a transaction of basic human dignity, carefully offered and carefully received. It felt like a first clean breath of air after being underwater for a very long time. Kyle continued to work. He didn't try to ingratiate himself or explain. He just showed up, on time, every day. He listened more than he spoke. He carried heavy things for people. He learned to play chess badly from a rotating group of sharp-eyed old-timers who delighted in mercilessly beating him, their cackles filling the game room. He heard stories of fighting in wars he'd only read about, of migrating north for jobs that didn't materialize, of love stories that spanned 60 years, of losses that never fully healed. Their experiences were nothing like his own, yet in their humor, their stubbornness, their frailty, and their strength, he began to see a common humanity. The world, once so small and revolving entirely around his own ego and social standing, began to expand in painful, challenging, and profoundly beautiful ways. The final, formal phase of Kyle's court-mandated restorative justice program was a facilitated face-to-face conference. Participation was voluntary for all parties. Evelyn, after much prayer and discussion with Marcus and her own conscience, agreed to participate. Marcus would be there as her support, not as a judge or an attorney, but as her son. They met in a neutral, sun-filled conference room at a community justice center, the atmosphere designed to be less institutional than a courtroom. Present were Kyle, his probation officer, a trained facilitator named Sarah, Evelyn, and Marcus. Kyle was visibly nervous, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, but he sat up straight, making eye contact. Sarah guided the conversation with skill. She began by asking Evelyn to speak about the impact of the crime, not just the immediate event, but the lasting ripple effects. Evelyn spoke calmly about the lingering anxiety in crowded public spaces, the occasional flash of memory that brought back the sting, the deep weariness the memory could induce. She also spoke of her decision to meet him in the detention center. "I needed you to understand the weight," she said directly to Kyle, "not the legal weight, the human weight." Then it was Kyle's turn. He didn't read from a prepared statement. He spoke from a place that seemed raw and real, the product of 2 years of introspection.
"I have spent every day for the last 2 years trying to understand the person I was that morning,"
he said, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. "He feels like a stranger to me now, and that's a relief, but it's also a horror. Because he was me, I carry him with me. I can't undo his actions. All I can do is try to build a life that actively repairs, in tiny daily ways, the damage he caused. My education, my service at the center, it's not a trade for forgiveness. It's a debt I will spend my life trying to pay, not to you, Mrs. Lawson, but to the world I poisoned with my actions, to be a counterweight." He then turned his gaze to Marcus, a gesture of respect that surprised everyone. "Judge Thorne, you could have destroyed me that day. The system you represent could have crushed me, and many would have said it was just. You showed me the law's terrifying power. Your mother," his voice wavered, thick with emotion, "showed me its purpose, to protect people like her from people like me. Thank you for letting the process work, for not making it about you, but about the law. It gave me a structure to become something else." Marcus, who had been listening with a neutral, attentive expression, gave a slow, measured nod. It was not forgiveness, not approval. It was a solemn acknowledgement of the journey, of the truth in Kyle's words about the law. It was a judge seeing that the sentence, in this instance, might be achieving one of its intended goals. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice soft but clear in the sunlit room. "Kyle, I didn't come here today for more apologies. I came to see who you are becoming. The jacket is gone, the performance is gone. Who are you now?" Kyle thought for a long moment, the silence respectful. "I'm a work in progress," he said finally. "I'm someone who is trying to listen more than he speaks. I'm someone who hopes to be useful, not important. I'm someone who knows he has to wake up every day and choose not to be that old person. And some days that's harder than others." A small, gentle, but genuine smile touched Evelyn's lips. It was the first one she had ever directed at him. "That," she said, with a note of finality that also held a trace of hope, "is a good place to start. The story, in its most dramatic, newsworthy sense, was over. Kyle completed his 3 years of supervised release without a single violation. He applied to, and was accepted at, a state university later than his peers, majoring in social work. He never sought publicity, never tried to become a professional redemption speaker or a poster child for reform. He declined interview requests. He simply lived a quiet, purposeful, and observant life, forever marked by a single terrible choice and the long, arduous road back from it. He worked part-time at a non-profit serving homeless veterans, many of them older men of color. He listened to their stories. He was useful. Evelyn Lawson returned to her diner rituals, though she sometimes went at a slightly later hour. The staff treated her with a gentle, protective reverence that slowly softened back into normalcy. Sometimes, when she's there, sipping her tea, she thinks of that morning. The memory has lost its sharp, cutting edge. It's now a scar, a reminder of vulnerability, yes, but also of her own profound strength, her son's unwavering devotion, and the strange, unpredictable possibility of human change. She still meets Marcus for coffee when their schedules align. They talk about books, the news, her garden, his work. The diner is just a diner again, a place of peace and simple nourishment. Marcus Thorne continues on the bench, his perspective forever deepened, his authority tempered by a hard-won wisdom. He sees defendants not as monsters, but as flawed, often broken humans who have made catastrophic choices. He administers justice with a firm and unwavering hand, but now, in the quiet of his chambers when considering sentences, he always makes space to consider the possibility of rehabilitation, remembering the shackled young man who finally, painfully, chose to look in the mirror his victim held up. The 3 lives, violently and publicly intersected on a random morning, returned to their own separate orbits, but each was permanently altered, carrying within them a fragment of the other's experience, a scar, a lesson, a burden, a possibility. The threads of their destinies, once savagely tangled, were now separate but parallel, each line subtly shaped by the brief, brutal contact of the others. We often see stories like this as simple, satisfying parables. The arrogant bully gets his dramatic instant comeuppance, and there is a deep, human, and not invalid satisfaction in that narrative. The universe righting a wrong, the powerful being humbled, the underdog vindicated. But the deeper story, the one that lingers in the silence, after the headlines fade, is not about the slap or the judge's credential or even the sentence. It's about the moments after. It's about the monumental choice of a son to channel his volcanic fury into protection and process, not blind retaliation. It's about the staggering courage of a mother to face her attacker not with vengeance, but with a devastatingly simple question: who are you? It's about the agonizing, halting, non-linear journey of a young man to answer that question honestly, to dismantle the prison of his own ignorance and entitlement, brick by painful brick, with no guarantee of reward. True justice in its highest form is not merely punitive, it is restorative. It seeks the repair of dignity for the victim, and it demands even, the possibility of demanding difficult transformation for the offender. It is messy, imperfect, achingly slow, and often unsatisfying to our thirst for swift revenge. It requires more from everyone involved, more courage, more patience, more faith, than simple rage ever does. The lesson taught in the diner wasn't the one Kyle Briggs intended to teach. The lesson was empathy. The lesson was the profound, interconnected weight of consequence. The lesson was that our actions are not isolated events. They are threads in a vast, delicate social fabric. A single act of cruel, dehumanizing contempt can tear a hole in that fabric that takes years and immense effort to mend. But the corollary, the hopeful counterpoint, is also true. A single act of grace, a cool cloth offered, a truthful word spoken in a visitation room, a chance for amends earned through relentless, humble work, can be the first, vital stitch in that repair. We live in a world often quick to outrage and slow to reflection, eager to categorize and reluctant to comprehend. This story is a reminder that within our legal systems and, more importantly, within our own hearts, there must be room for both unwavering accountability and the possibility of growth. For the fierce, unyielding defense of the vulnerable, and for the difficult, narrow path toward change for those who have inflicted harm. Evelyn, Marcus, and Kyle's paths collided in an explosion of violence and prejudice, but they parted, not with a bang, but with a fragile, hard-won, and deeply human understanding. That understanding of pain, of responsibility, of the long road back, is the real, quiet victory. Not a sentence served, but a humanity reclaimed for all of them. So, I leave you with this question, not about the story itself, but about the world we share and shape every day. From which part of the country are you watching this story? Because the geography of the heart matters more than any state line. Wherever you are, the daily unrecorded choices between cruelty and kindness, between reflexive rage and difficult restoration, are being made in diners, on streets, in schools, in homes, and in the quiet of your own conscience. What will you choose to teach with your actions today, and what are you willing to learn from the consequences should you ever get it wrong? The answer to that is the story that will define your life.